Hey guys, Adam here with AmericanTrucks.com. Today we're taking a quick look at and installing the Fox IFP Coil-Over Shock, available for the 0 to 2 inch lifted 14 to 18 Ram 1500s, whether it be an Eco Diesel, 5.7, or your V6 model without air ride. And this is going to be a great option for the Ram owners out there who are looking to upgrade their front coilovers or the front strut to get something that's more dynamic, better for on and off-road driving, and has much better components. Now I'll break down all the details of every component and the makeup of this coilover from Fox a little bit later in the video when we compare it to the stock component. But up front, I want to hit you with some of the bigger details. The big thing about this shock from Fox is, among other things, the fact that you can adjust preload. Now, preload is essentially how much tension or compression is on your spring prior to having the weight of the vehicle on it. So what that basically means is your weight of the vehicle, like it is now, up in the air. So we have a little bit of preload here right out of the box that'll give you somewhat close to a factory ride quality, maybe a little bit stiffer and a little bit sportier. You can adjust that preload to condense that or compress that spring a little bit more if you'd like a tighter, sportier suspension. You can also take it the opposite way and expand that with less preload to give you a more comfortable or fluid ride with a looser spring rate. So that's something you can do here that you can't do with your factory shock. And again, I'll take it in detail later on. Now this also has a larger shaft, a higher quality piston that has advanced JM20 suspension fluid that's better for variable temperatures. So if you're taking your truck to its extremes on or off-road, this shock and coilover assembly is better suited to handle it. It uses quiet nitrile rubber bushings for greater wheel articulation, perfect for lifted applications or off-road use, and it has a number of other beneficial features here that I'll break down soon. Now this coilover from Fox come in right around 500 bucks a piece and are sold individually. So you have to pick them up separately to complete the front end of your truck. You can pair those nicely with Fox rear shocks to really get the full suspension effect of Fox Racing's equipment. Now it's definitely recommended to pick them up as a complete set, but if you want to just tackle the front end first, you can definitely do so, and it has a huge impact on your truck's performance on and off road. Now the install for this, I'm going to give 2 out of 3 wrenches on our difficulty meter. There's no modification necessary. As a matter of fact, it's actually pretty simple to tackle in your driveway at home with very simple hand tools. Now I'd recommend having air tools if you have access to them. Ratcheting wrenches go a long way. There's definitely specialty tools that can make life a little easier, but it can be done with simple hand tools. So I'm going to take you through every single step of the process. It'll take about 2 hours from start to finish. What do you say we get started? All right, tools used in this install include an impact gun. I also use an air tool as well, 1/2 inch extension, 17, 21, 15/16, and a swivel socket, torque wrench, a bungee cord or something similar is recommended, 17 millimeter ratcheting wrench is recommended, 15 and 16 millimeter ratcheting wrenches, 21 millimeter wrench, 3/8 ratchet, pry bar, hammer, and a flathead screwdriver. First things first, we're going to tackle our driver's side. Now we got our wheel out of the way, and we want to tackle removing the ABS line from the knuckle itself. So if you follow this brake line down, this here is attached to the knuckle right past the rotor. You don't need any sockets or anything like that. You're really just going to pull straight back. You might have to wiggle it back and forth, but it'll detach. And from there, we can move forward. Next step, we're going to disconnect our sway bar end link from the sway bar at the top here. Now this is a 17 millimeter nut, and if you're having trouble getting this off, sometimes when you start loosening it, the entire bushing will start spinning and the stud will rotate with it, making it really difficult. If that is the case, grab a 17 millimeter wrench and a 7 millimeter socket. You can hold this top portion steady so it doesn't keep spinning. Now I'm going to use my 17 socket and see if it comes off. Looked like it didn't give us any trouble. Now what I'm actually going to do, I got it loosened up. I'm going to leave it a couple threads on, and if we need more room later, I'll take this off. All right, now we can do our tie rod end. This guy has a 21 millimeter nut on the bottom here connected to the knuckle. So I got my impact gun. And the same situation applies here. If you're having trouble getting it off, you can use a wrench and hold the end there, and then a wrench on the nut. Looks like we're doing all right. It's stuck in there, so I'm going to grab a hammer and get this off. Now when you do use a hammer, you don't want to hit directly on the stud because it can damage it. Thread the nut on a couple of threads so you're hitting the nut instead of the threading itself. From there you can take the tie rod end out, and I like to thread the nut back on just so we don't lose it. Next we're going to tackle the upper control arm ball joint to the knuckle. Now this is a 21 millimeter nut, and it also can be the same case. If it starts spinning, use the wrench trick that I mentioned earlier. Now that we have the tie rod end out, it's going to want to keep rotating. So when I put this ratchet on, it's really hard to get the leverage we need. So I'm actually gonna put the tie rod end back into the knuckle without tightening it down, just to keep it from moving side to side. I think that'll make our life a little bit easier. So I'll just put the nut back on a little bit, and that way it doesn't move. Now you can grab your 21 deep socket, and I'm gonna use my 3/8 ratchet and get this off. All right, now for this one, we're gonna do the same thing we did with the tie rod end and keep this on a couple of threads, and we're gonna hammer this out. Now for this, you don't wanna hammer on the upper control arm here. You don't wanna damage the ball joint at all. So you wanna hit this knuckle right next to it. All right, so now that we broke that loose, let's grab our tie rod end and take this off. Put the nut back on, and now we can focus on the upper control arm. All right, so for this, I'm gonna take my pry bar, put it around one of the coils, and pull down. That way, I can thread the nut back off, put my hand on the spindle, and guide it down. Now before we move any further, this is pretty important here. You can see the entire knuckle is shifted down, and that's putting a little bit more stress than we're comfortable with on the brake line going to the caliper. So what you want to do is grab a bungee strap or something similar like this. We're going to connect this to the frame in one of the holes, and then on the other end, we're going to wrap this around, pull it up to take some of the pressure off, and hook it in. That way, we have a little bit more slack on the brake line, and it's not putting pressure on it. All right, so next up, we're going to do the bottom strut bolt. Now this is a 15/16 nut and a 21mm bolt head. I'm holding the bolt head with my wrench. I've got my 15/16 on my impact gun. Let's get this off. Now it looks like we're at the right angle that I can just pull this out, but if you're having trouble, you can use a hammer to try to knock it free. And if it gets stuck in there, just grab a screwdriver, put it in, and tap it out like a hammer and chisel. All right, this next part's pretty simple. We're at the top of the strut tower. We're gonna get the 3 nuts off holding it on, and then we can bring the entire coilover out. Now you're gonna grab your 15mm ratcheting wrench is what I'd recommend. One of them that's a little bit longer that you can get more leverage on. It makes life easier. Not a ton of room up here, but you can probably get a deep socket and a ratchet in there if that's all you have. All right, so now we can get these 3 off. All right, so now we're ready to take the entire strut assembly out. Now, I'd recommend having a pry bar on deck for this because lowering this lower control arm can be tough and it's a little tight down here. So what I like to do is to grab a pry bar, lift it up and put it right underneath of the coilover or the factory strut. And I'm gonna pry it out of position. So you can see that came around. Now we can just work it out and it falls right through. Doing that by hand can prove to be pretty difficult. Now we can set this aside. We have the IFP Shock from Fox next to our factory strut. I want to take you through some quick similarities and differences between the two kits, and really this is going to be night and day. The only thing that is very similar would be the fitment and the quality of parts. The IFP is the internal floating piston that separates the shock oil from high pressure nitrogen gas chambers to allow for maximum performance over that factory coilover or the factory strut. You're going to get a night and day difference in ride quality both on and off road. This uses JM92 advanced suspension fluid that's great at variable temperatures and make sure that if you're just driving casually on the road, you get a nice comfortable ride, but it can adjust very quickly to some of the high pressure off-road situations you may be taking your truck to. Now this is going to also have a variable spring rate or a progressive spring rate that's going to give you a comfortable ride, but also allow it to stiffen up and handle those situations better off-road. Now this comes with a 2-inch 6061 T6 aluminum body, which is going to be better for cooling, that also has a clear anodized body plating. The top hat is a black coated anodized CNC machine billet aluminum, which is going to have precision fitment for your Ram. It also has a 5/8 inch hard chrome plated shaft and a high flow piston with application specific driving, which is what I just mentioned there. Kind of goes hand in hand with the IFP. Now it has redundant seal packing systems. It also uses quiet nitrile rubber bushings, which are going to be great for more articulation. So once you have a lifted truck, and again this is good for lifts from 0 or stock to 2 inches, you're going to need a shock that is capable of handling greater articulation, and that's what you get here with those advanced bushing systems. One of the big things that'll separate this coilover from your factory strut is the preload ring. Now, as you can see on your strut body or the shaft here, you have threads all the way down from about 4 inches in to the bottom here. Now that's going to allow you to adjust how much preload is set on the spring. Now preload is essentially how much compression there is on the spring before the weight of the vehicle is put on it. Now if you adjust this to bring the spring smaller, you're adding more preload to that. What that essentially does, it gives you a stiffer ride and a more rigid ride. Having that stiffer ride is going to feel a lot sportier. If that's what you're going for with your truck, you have that ability. Or you can adjust it to have less preload and be more bouncy, giving you a more comfortable ride, a more fluid ride. So you have that ability right there, and that obviously is not something you have with the factory strut that is preset non-adjustable. So right out of the box, Fox has it set to about the neutral range, closer to the factory ride quality. It might be a little stiffer out of the box, but you can also, again, just have that free roam adjustability. And that's a hex screw holding that on, you loosen it up, and then you can adjust it from there, tighter or looser, up or down. So those are the big differences between the two kits. Overall, this is going to be outperforming the factory strut both on and off-road. It has a lot of components that are a lot more advanced in factory that can achieve a higher performance, especially at those higher temperatures. All right, so now that we took a closer look at the Fox option versus factory, what do you say we take this and throw it into our truck? All right, so now we have our coilover from Fox. We're going to set it into place. Now, I've got one of the nuts in my hand, so when I put it through the top of the strut tower, I'm going to tighten down the nut just a little bit to hold it in place, and then we'll seat it at the bottom. Keep in mind you will put a washer up at the top, but I'm just going to use the nut for now. We'll come back at the very end and tighten up the 3 nuts at the top with the washers. You also want to take note, one of the studs is marked green. That's going to be your front stud facing the outside of the vehicle. So that's what we're going to line that up with. So why don't we slide this guy in and line it up to those holes, putting it through just like that so the studs come through the top. Now I'm going to take this nut and just thread it on as much as I can on the front. It's a nylon lock nut, so it will just stop here, but at least now it's holding it in. Now we can do a trick similar to the one we did taking it off. We're just going to pry it forward. So I'm going to take my pry bar and set it underneath. All right, so once you have that seated in there, we can put our bolt through. All right, now when putting your bolt through, you want to put the bolt head on the same side it was on taking it off, so it's going to be on the inside here. The only difference is now this is hard to line up. So a good idea would be to take a flathead screwdriver, put it through this hole, through the lower control arm, and help align it that way so you can slide your bolt through. All right, so I have my flathead in here, and I'm going to pry it up to align the holes while looking through the other side. All right, when you fiddle with it enough, you'll get the bolt started, and then you can take a hammer and tap it through. Now we can take the nut and thread it on by hand. Now we can grab our 15/16 socket and our 21mm wrench and tighten down that bolt. All right, so now we're going to take our tie rod end, take that nut off there, lift this guy back up into place, and throw the tie rod through. That'll help hold this from going side to side. All right, so now we can take our bungee cord or whatever you're using to hold this back up right off. Swing this guy around. Now you want to pick it up immediately just so you're not putting pressure on it. We're going to bring this down, drop it into place. I'm going to use a pry bar to hold that down, and then put our nut on the other side. All right, so I'm going to put my pry bar right underneath of that strut tower and start bringing it down. Grab your nut and thread it on. Put it on as many as you can. You might have to readjust your pry bar. I try to put it all the way down as far as I can get it hand tight. Now I'm going to use my impact gun, an extension, a swivel socket, and my 21mm to go up from underneath to get to our ball joint nut. Now while I'm putting this on, I'm also going to pry down with my pry bar up here on the upper control arm to put some pressure on it to keep it from spinning. So now you can take your 21 socket and tighten down your tie rod end. Grab your 17 deep socket and tighten up your sway bar end length. All right, so at this point we can focus on the top 3 strut tower nuts. So we're going to take this back off because we kept that on there to hold it in place. Make sure you put your washers in place in there and then tighten them back down. So I'm going to hit the ones in the back here. We already have our washers on there. Now I'm going to grab a 17mm ratcheting wrench to tighten these guys down, but if you have a regular ratchet and socket, whatever you use to remove the old ones, you can use that here as well. Lastly, you want to reconnect, pushpin clip or this plastic clip here holding on your ABS line that goes right back into the knuckle. Now we can grab our torque wrench and torque everything down. First one I'm going to torque down is our bottom strut bolt. That's going to be a 15/16 socket, torque down to 100 foot-pounds. Now we can torque down our tie rod nut to 78 foot-pounds. So now we can set our upper control arm ball joint nut to 70 foot-pounds. All right, so that's gonna wrap this up here. Now, of course, you wanna make sure you're looking up the proper torque specs for your specific model before moving forward with a torque wrench. And of course, you can pick up your spanner wrench separately if you want to adjust your preload. You can bring that collar upward to compress the spring to make it a little bit tighter and stiffer. Bring it down if you wanna do the opposite and have a loose, more fluid ride. Now, if you bought another coilover for your opposite side, you'll just repeat the exact same process over there. So that's gonna wrap up my review and install for the Fox IFP Coil-Over Shock, fitting all 0 to 2 inch lifts on your 14 to 18 Ram without air ride. You can get yours right here at AmericanTrucks.com.